Today on the Pitch Quick podcast, Zach is pitching Debt, The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. And I'm pitching The Stone Roses, War and Peace by Simon Spence. Batter up! All right, Zach, I have a story for you.
All right, let's hear it.
I'll try to make it quick.
I'm ready. You gave me a little primer, so let's hear it.
I just told you that I have a story. So this actually happened this week. So my wife and I and some friends, Kyle and Jen, we went down to Texas to see the Charlatans play. It's my favorite band, and we're in a hotel. We're kind of waiting for we had a little time before the show started, and we're like, Kyle and Jen, let's hang out. We'll just go hang out in your hotel room and chat for a minute before we go to dinner. And Cammy was like, we didn't have a blow dryer in our hotel, so she's like, hey, you guys have a blow dryer? Anyway, point is, she goes down, blow dries her hair, and she wants to come back up and use the straightener in our room. So we're hanging out in Kyle's room for a minute. She's like, okay, I'll be right back. I'm just gonna go straighten my hair. And then like 10 minutes later, and we're just a floor above them in the hotel. 10 minutes later, I get this text that says, please save me, come up now. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, I look at Kyle and Jen, I'm like, that's a really weird text to get at a hotel where she's one floor above me and has been gone for 10 minutes. Like what could possibly have happened in the hotel room that she needs my help, right? Especially with a text like that. So I'm like, okay. So I kind of leisurely make my way up to the elevator. I get off the elevator and she's standing right outside the elevator with this awkward older guy who's just, you can tell, just talking to her, just like talking her ear off. So she's like she's been stuck in this conversation loop for like 10 minutes. And where we were in Houston is right by a ton of hospitals. There's like 7 or 8 hospitals right around there. So you don't know if this guy's like, this people come here for treatment. I don't know. It was just super weird. He's not a threatening guy. He's an older guy. He clearly has some mental issues. I don't really know. But apparently so the story is he followed Cammy. There was 2 people on the elevator when she went up a floor, and he follows her out, and our room is literally right next to the elevator. So she doesn't really want to go in the room and have this guy, know exactly where she is. And he just starts talking to her. He's like, hey, you know what I was telling that lady on the elevator before you? And she's like, no, I was telling her that, well, do you know who man's best friend is? And she's like, a dog? Nope, that's not right. Nope. Do you know who? Don't think about where we are. Where are you from? And she's like, Utah. And anyway, so she he starts talking to her. And he's like, do you know who man's best friend is? And she's like, I don't know, a pig, a cow. I have no idea. Don't think about where we are. I moved to the Gulf Coast for a reason. And she's like, okay. And she says that he says, man's best friend is a dolphin. And she's like,
no.
Oh, okay. And he's like, I wish there was a show about horses that were carrying somebody and then all of a sudden turned into dolphins and then help stop human trafficking. And Cammy's just like, what is going on? A show about where horses turn into dolphins as man's best friend to help stop human trafficking. And then he says, don't you want to stop human trafficking? She's like, well, yeah, sure. Of course I want to stop human trafficking, but what can I do about it?
That's one way.
And then, so this is going on, and it's super odd, obviously an odd conversation, right? He's like, wouldn't you do anything to stop human trafficking? Like, okay, this is getting pretty weird. And so that's when she texts me. She's like, save me, like come to get me away from this guy, because she's too nice to leave. He doesn't want to like have him follow her in the room or anything, right? So I hop off the elevator and I see that she's talking to this guy. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Like she got stuck talking to a weirdo. And it was really weird because he starts saying, do you know who Stonewall Jackson is? And Cammy's like, yeah, like leader of the Civil War, like a general, And he's like, do you know so and so and so and so? And people we'd obviously never heard of. And he's like, and she's like, nope, I don't know who they are. It's like, well, people should know who they are. They were also in the Civil War, big in the Civil War. Do you know what branch of the military they were in? And Cammy's like, well, he's been talking about the Gulf Coast and dolphins, so maybe the Coast Guard. I don't know when the Coast Guard started. So she's like, Coast Guard, and he's like, no. And by this time I'm standing there, and he says,
what a great answer.
And she's like, Coast Guard? He's like, nope, that's not right. Do you know what branch it was? And she's thinking to herself, like, Marines aren't invented yet. You know what I mean? Like, and I just go, Navy? And he's like, I'm not asking you. He turns to me, like all mad. I'm not asking you. I'm asking her. And that at that point, you're like, okay, you never know, dude, if this guy is gonna, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
lose it or whatever. So anyway, I'm like, okay, Cam, well, we gotta go. So I start walking, and I kind of forget even where our hotel room is. So I'm just trying to like walk just to get away and like, you know, give her the cue to like just start walking away from this guy. And she stays for kind of another second and starts walking, and we're just like, okay, well, we gotta go. See ya. You know, like just getting away from this guy. It was so
What?
strange, but
What
yeah.
hotel? What were you in? Like a Super 8?
No,
Like,
yeah, we were in one of those ones where you what's it called, like extended stay America. So you stay for like weeks. They have like a little kitchenette or something. It was just dirt cheap, and
so he
but
just wandered into the
well,
hotel.
he maybe was a guest at the hotel. I have no idea. This is the second floor, so he
Oh,
wandered in and like assumed maybe it was a guest. I don't know. It was super weird, but he does.
dude.
Oh, then Cammy was saying, yeah, like, oh, he wants to make a comic book, or he's like, oh, she was like telling me he wants to make a comic book about horses turning into dolphins. He's like, no, I didn't say I wanted to make it. I said it'd be cool if there was a show. He's just so weird, so awkward. But she's like, I was like not scared, but kind of scared because it's not like he's a big guy, but you just never know. Yeah, it was super weird. Okay,
It's
anyway,
it's one of those conversations where you wish it was happening with someone else and you could just
yeah,
observe,
exactly. You could just listen
not be
to it.
part of it, but
Right,
just
right.
like this person is nuts.
Yeah, it was very strange. So anyway,
That's
um,
funny.
that's my story. Now, perfect segue into debt. The first 5,000 years. I love the what's great about this podcast is we don't tell each other what book we're gonna pitch. So the fact that mine's about a band, a rock and roll band, and yours
Of
is
course.
about debt, then it just makes perfect sense. So people, no, I wonder if people love our podcast. All right, tell me about Debt: The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber.
All right. Yeah, we're playing to our strengths, right?
Yes,
Sometimes you just go to music and I go to like weird historical money
historical
books that
finance.
no one ever reads,
Exactly. Yes.
but is really interesting. Okay, so so there's a couple things as you kind of dive into this book. It's pretty lengthy. I think it's 500 pages, but it really goes through the history of money. Now, if someone asked you, and I hate when people ask me on the spot, like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" and they know the answer, but you're like, "I don't know." But if someone asked you, I think most people would have an answer to this question. Um, where did money start?
I'm gonna say Greece. I'm gonna guess Greece. Like the Greek.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, that's my initial thought. I know, like, didn't the Phoenicians like trade? They'd go put stuff on like on a beach to trade, and then like let the natives come and like put what they wanted, and then if they, that's my understanding. And then suddenly they said, here's a currency, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. So
Okay,
silver coins, gold coins,
yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
definitely goes back to like the Romans
Yeah,
and I think it was Aristotle, might have been Plato, but they basically said there's no intrinsic value to gold or to silver. We just agreed that this is a scarce commodity that we could use for money. Like,
exactly. Yeah,
it's valuable now that we use it
yeah,
for money. But going back even earlier in time,
yeah.
there's records of debt being used. And before I dive into this, I'm going to just share a story about my wife and I and our neighbor across the street. And I don't know where this started. I don't know how it's going to end. But when we go to Costco, they have these rotisserie chickens.
Yeah.
And before we moved here, we just bought one rotisserie chicken for dinner.
Yeah.
But now we buy two. One is for the Huishes,
Yeah.
and the other one we'll say is for the Smiths.
Yeah.
And when they go to Costco, they buy two chickens. And every time we go to Costco, it's like in my head, I'm like, I gotta get a chicken. Like
chicken.
sometimes I don't even want a chicken. I'm like, I gotta get one for the Smiths, because I don't know.
Yeah.
Do I owe them or do they owe me? Like, where are we in this transaction? Like, who's keeping score?
Right.
And in this book, that's how money really starts. He argues that it wasn't the, currencies, although there are records of shells and there's records of using these big, massive wheel stones
Hmm.
and people kept their ledgers in their houses. He argues that money really started with this credit and debit system of people, one individual owing another individual a favor. Hey, I'll pay you back, and we're going to keep track of this between us, or doing it in between tribes. And sometimes, tribes would. He goes in and talks about how slavery kind of evolves, where my brother kills your brother, and you're really mad about it. We don't want to go to war, so my brother is now going to be a slave to your tribe. I mean, it
Wow.
just
Yeah, yeah.
kind
That's
of
crazy.
evolves, but before currencies even come into play, like into gold and silver, you have these rituals. There's primordial sacrifices being made because the tribe owes the creator, and once you are sacrificed, you become you're relieved of your debt to the creator.
Hmm.
Just like
Yeah,
all
yeah.
this kind of crazy. To us, it's crazy. Now we've kind of evolved to where you've got currencies and gold coins and silver coins, and in
Right.
the medieval times they transitioned to, well, I've got this gold in my vault, let's say, and people don't want to just like be moving gold in and out, so they start with like these paper receipts, and then
Yeah.
the person holding the money says, you know what, I think I could just lend back out some money and they're going to pay me back, and no one's ever really moving this gold, but it's
Right.
here.
Yeah.
And if everyone shows up at the same day, so that kind of
Yeah, yeah.
leads into our
Like
modern day.
the first bank or what? Is that kind of what
Yeah,
it?
like the
Yeah. Okay.
first banking systems in the medieval times.
Huh. Okay.
So you go from like a one-to-one transaction where one coin for one service into
Yeah.
this debt system. And now we have kind of, I don't want to say mastered it, but we have like blown it up into this multi-trillion dollar
Some people have mastered it, and
global.
some people
Yeah,
have not mastered it.
right. Yeah, on an individual level and on a global
Yeah.
level, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So in the book, there's a couple key quotes that I really took away as nuggets that I thought this is a good way to think about money. So in ancient Greek, the word for honor was time. In Homer's time, the term appears to be used much like the Irish term honor price. So I thought it is interesting to think about how we trade our time for money
Hmm.
when we go to work, and when we go into debt, we're trading our future time for something today that I have to pay back with interest.
Yeah.
And interest, the Greeks, and it's amazing that the Greeks just had all of this knowledge and wisdom. They figured things out so early. But the word interest literally means offspring.
Hmm.
So these little interest payments are kind of the offspring to the principal. When somebody owes you money or you owe them money, you're paying the bank back offspring.
Right.
In some cases, the debt became abusive. So if you were somebody that wanted to buy farmland, uh, the owner of the farmland would say, "Hey, you know what? I'll give you these 50 acres, and you can farm them, but you're going to have to pay me back with your time." And the balance of the trade would be so in favor of the landlord that the
Right.
person who's farming it actually just becomes a serf, right? They're
Yeah.
just
Exactly.
working forever. They're never going to be able to pay off the debt, but they're like, I got to eat. I have
Right.
to
Exactly.
survive some way. And so the book just goes through all of these different types of transactions over time. And thankfully, we've moved away from the sacrifice. Some of the things that I think we should probably go back to would be more of a gold standard where there
Yeah.
is something actually backing your money. Not to get too much into politics, but there's
Yeah.
in 1971 we moved off the gold standard. We went to kind of this debt-based system, and so it's interesting. Kind of fast forwarding to today, I'm just going to share a couple quotes. So the United States Treasury gold reserves are indeed kept at Fort Knox, but the Federal Reserve's gold reserves and those of more than 100 other central banks, governments, and organizations are stored in vaults under the Federal Reserve Building at 33 Liberty Street in Manhattan, 2 blocks away from towers at roughly 5,000 metric tons. So that's 266 million troy ounces. These
Wow.
combined reserves represent, according to the Federal Reserve's own website, somewhere between 1/5 and 1/4 of all the gold that has ever been taken from the earth. Not amazing? Like, who's going to go steal that?
Well, how could you? How could you?
Yeah, how could you? So there is some gold, but it's not dollar for dollar. It's not even close, right? We
Yeah,
have
yeah.
like $34 trillion in debt in the United States. So he goes into some of the ways that this debt, if you look at the World Bank, you have nations that are developing, they're trying to build in their infrastructure and they need a loan. So they go to the World Bank and say, we need money. And the World Bank says, that's fine. We're going to lend you this, $1 billion or $20 billion or whatever, but you have to pay it back with interest. And this little country, there's no way they could ever pay it back. And so they default on their loans, but then they refinance everything. And it just is like this ongoing circus of just debt and interest payments. And what we've done is we're now in a society where everyone is glued together, as we saw in the 2007, 2008, where one big bank collapses and it just sends all of these ripples
Hmm.
out. So we're currently in a debt system. And when, as an example, when Saddam Hussein made the bold move of single-handedly switching from the dollar to the euro in 2000, this is interesting. A lot of people don't know this. Followed by Iran in 2001. This was quickly followed by American bombing and military occupation. How much did Hussein's decision to buck the dollar really weigh into the U.S. decision to depose him? It's impossible to say. His decision to stop using the enemy's currency, as he put it, was one in back and forth series of hostile gestures that likely would have led to weigh in an even to weigh in any even. What's important here is that they were widespread rumors that this was one of the major contributing factors, and therefore no policy position to make similar switch can completely ignore the possibility. So the book kind of weighs into how the United States has seigniorage, meaning we have 60% or something like that of the world's global reserve currency that settles in the US dollar. We just keep issuing more debt. It's just kind of crazy how things have kind of ballooned. So this book really starts out 5,000 years ago with these little tiny favors going back and forth between people to where we're at today. And I would just say to the listener, try to stay out of debt and try not to owe your neighbors a rotisserie chicken from Costco. No, it's good. It's fun. It was just a reminder as I was reading this book.
Yeah.
We were doing this Costco chicken exchange. I'm like, yeah, we're still doing it today.
Chicken exchange.
I owe you. I'll pay you back later. You shovel my walk. She'll pay me back, in
Yeah,
a different
exactly.
way. And
That's
hopefully the
funny.
balance of trade evens out over time.
There you go. Very cool. I remember I had a buddy of mine when I think we must have been junior high because you could buy I was borrowing money to like go to the vending machines, right? To get some chips or something. And I didn't have any money. And I asked my friend, I'm like, hey, can I borrow $1 or something? He's like, yeah, but I'm gonna have to charge you interest. He's like 14 years old and he's like,
I love it. I
I'm
love
like,
it.
oh, okay. So I had to like pay him like $1.25 back or something. It was so odd because we were 14
you,
years old.
you had to carry
But
his books for the rest of the
let's
year
just put it this
around
way:
to all his
he's a lot more
classes.
successful guy than I am, but right now, anyway, no, I'm just kidding. Funny enough, he's in finance in Germany now. So anyway,
Of
all
course.
right. So I will switch over to my stuff. This is
All right, let's hear it.
a book called The Stone Roses: War and Peace. Um, and I'm gonna guess that you don't know a lot about the Stone Roses, so I gave you a homework assignment today, right?
Yeah, so I listened to the song on YouTube. It was 10 minutes long,
Correct.
and I did listen to it.
Okay, so I made you listen to this song.
Okay.
It's called "Fool's Gold" by the Stone Roses, and this, along with another song called "The Only One I Know" by the Charlatans, sort of changed my perspective and kind of changed my life as far as my musical taste. So I grew up. I didn't have an older brother or anything like that, but I did have an uncle who was adopted, he's probably like 3 years older than me, so it was kind of like having an older brother, right? And he was really into music in high school, and I was probably in elementary school. and I'd been hanging out with me. He's like, "Oh, check out this new album, check out this new tape and stuff." So I was into music at a young age, but the '80s are kind of corny. There's the new wave, which is kind of what I was into stuff, but it's kind of depressing, like Depeche Mode and The Cure and the Smiths and stuff. It's like, okay. Anyway, so I would listen to the radio quite a bit, and there was a specific show I listened to. I think it was like on like 10 o'clock at night on Sunday nights called Rock Over London, and it was basically just a radio show out of London that would just play whatever's going on in England. And the first time I heard "Fool's Gold," the song I made you listen to, the 10-minute song, it just kind of blew my mind because it was so different than like kind of what I considered, at least now, the kind of the cheesy, depressing, like Depeche
Hmm.
Mode, like, oh, I want somebody to share the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just a little more funky, a little more like rock and roll, but with like dance mixed in it, dance beats. And I'm like, what is this? And so that's how I figured out who the Stone Roses were, and went and bought the album. This is back when CDs were brand new, right? Like 1990 for me. The album came out in 89 in the UK, but I probably didn't hear it till like 90, 91, something like that. Anyway, so this album, it's just the Stone Roses. It's a self-titled album. Um, is considered kind of one of the greatest albums ever written. Certainly one of the best debut albums ever written. And the Stone Roses, if you obviously if you don't know the Stone Roses, like I'll give you the quick and dirty on kind of what happened. But they only have two albums out ever. And so this band, when they came out, when this came out, it was like an unbelievable hit in the UK, especially, and obviously somewhat in the US as well. And and then they didn't put an album out for another like 6 years, 5, 6 years. And it was and so the story behind it is actually fairly interesting, for people that don't know it, and people that do know it. And again, we might have some UK listeners that know the story way better than me, obviously. But what happened is kind of crazy. So the Stone Roses kind of started. John Squire's the guitarist. Ian Brown is the singer. They just thought it was cool. Like, oh, there's all kinds of music, obviously, in Manchester, and this big scene. That's where Joy Division, New Order, stuff like that was happening in the '80s, and they just wanted to be in a band. It sounded like, and John Squire is just an amazing guitarist. But I'm he kind of just had to. I'm trying to remember. I think he. I don't remember all the details, but basically he just picked up and played, and was really influenced by like blues guitar and stuff. And so a lot of his stuff is kind of rock and roll blues mix, kind of like the Led Zeppelin influence a little bit. Anyway, they kind of start this band, and they have they put out like or they're trying to put out a single, and they they don't really have anybody who's going to manage them, right? And so they end up like trying to go to London and try to and just play there, and they finally get somebody who's willing to sign them. But the guy that signs them is I think his name's Gareth Edwards. And so there's a couple. If you don't want to read the book, that's totally fine. There's a BBC documentary called Blood on the Turntable. It's on YouTube. You can check it out. That'll tell you what all the cool information that's in the book in like an hour. But Gareth Edwards, they interview him quite a bit, and he is hilariously pompous. Like, it is unbelievable. He's like, here's my impression of him.
All
He's
right,
like,
let's have it.
did I make the Stone Roses? Did they make me? You decide. I was the one who gave them all the money to make the records. Let let's just put it this way. I am the Stone Roses. They are me, and he's just the manager. And so
Right.
he was this guy who was like a model, and he ended up like working for Vidal Sassoon or something, and then he became like, and he had a bunch of salons. So this is a guy who got rich making, in the salon industry, and decided he was he was going to be a band manager, but he's ended up. So the problem was the contract. The Stone Roses were so desperate to have like a manager and get a contract that they signed this crazy contract with Gareth, uh, that would give 33 and a third percent of their gross earnings to him, right?
Wow.
And so you say wow because you know a little bit about finances. They were just kind of dumb kids, for lack of a better word, and we're like, okay, well, he's a manager. He says he's going to be good, and he's a business guy. He's kind of throwing money all around because he's pretty rich. And they're like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. So they end up signing this record Well, one of the guys, Andy Cousins, who's the rhythm guitarist in the band, won't sign it, and he's just like, "I'm not signing this. This is stupid. I'm not giving him. This is gross profits. This isn't even net." And anyway, so he won't sign it. They kind of kick him out of the band, and they get a different bass player. Anyway, I don't want to go too into detail, but ultimately, what happens is they sign with Gareth, then they need to find a record company that will actually, produce the CDs. This isn't like when you could just release on, Spotify or something. You had to have actually someone go make the tape, make the record. And so they couldn't find anyone. They actually ended up signing a record deal with a guy. I can't remember the name of the company, but he's kind of more of like a just traditional rock and roll. Like this would be like somebody who would sign like Motley Crue, or what I mean, not necessarily like kind of the what was called the Manchester scene going on at the time. Anyway, they released one single called Sally Cinnamon, and it sells really well. And they're getting ready to produce their album, and they end up signing with a different record company. So this heavy metal record company has like the rights to this one song, and they want to put a video out. And the Stone Roses are like, I'm not doing a video. We're signed with this other company with Silvertone or whatever. So we're not doing a video for you. So he ends up just making this kind of homemade video. And it's just kind of like, scenes of Manchester, the record company guy, because says this is basically like exactly all of the videos at the time. Well, the Stone Roses are super mad about it. Okay. They're like super mad that he creates this video without their permission, and they're not in it and all this stuff. And they're refusing to do the video for him. So what does any band do when somebody makes a video for them that they don't want to be made? They take a bunch of paint, they knock on the door, and when he opens the door, they just throw this paint all over him. They smash up his car, they throw paint
Oh,
all over his car, like and this guy has like the legal rights to do what he did. Well, now the
right.
police are involved, right? And so they have to go to court, and they're actually threatened to do like there's like real jail time potential here for the band. And
Yeah.
so and again, I'm getting all these confused, but there's just a whole lot of like legal issues. First of all, they might be going to jail, so they can't really record, but they do put, their album is out, it's doing really well. um and obviously at that point you want to capitalize on that, have another album, all that stuff, but they can't because they've got all these legal problems. They might be going to jail. They uh, anyway, they don't they kind of want to break up with Gareth Edwards, right? Like their the role manager. So let me give you another example of Gareth, because it's so great. He's talking about them potentially going to jail, right? He's like, if they would have gone to jail, no problem. It would have been great for them. They'd been able to work out. They would have been writing some songs. They would all the publicity. It would have been great if they'd gone to jail. Like this is the kind of guy that they are dealing with, right?
Right.
And anyway, so it's such a crazy cast of characters. And like the Stone Roses are very kind of pompous. Like there'll be interviews with them, and they'll ask Ian Brown like, hey, what do you think when somebody leaves your concert, like while you're playing? And he goes, I look at them, and if they're dressed well, I'm a bit disappointed, but if they're not dressed well, I don't care. They'll say stuff like we're gonna be the biggest band in the world. uh you don't like it, or like he's like, we know we're the best and you're gonna like us, it just might take you a little time to fall in love with us, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, but meanwhile, this album is just absolutely brilliant, and everyone's waiting for a second album, but they can't. Again, there's some legal problems. I don't know all the details because it's been a while since I read this, but um they can't even record, so they're not allowed because this legal stuff that's going on, um to record an album. So they finally do. Now again, I'm in my perspective, this is the reason this is interesting to me, is because I live in Utah. I don't know anything that's going on with all these legal troubles. All I know is there was an album that I absolutely loved that came out in, like, to me it came out in like 1990, and it's unbelievable. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. And then all of a sudden I hear like, this was a long time ago, where you could call in and there would be like it would be like the top 5 songs of the day or something like that, right? This is 1995-ish. Okay. So
Oh, okay.
I call in and like, oh, what's going on? They're like, number 5 is oh my gosh, what's it called? Some Anyway, it was a song from their second album, like their first single, and
Oh, really?
I can't remember it. And so suddenly, like, this is how I hear that there's a new album out. And oh my gosh. Anyway, So it starts playing. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Like there's a new album. But for everybody else, they kind of know what's going on. And this album comes out, and it's not as good as the first album. It's called Second Coming. And it's like 5 years later. And I love it. It's a lot more. So the first album is a lot more like 60s influenced, more like um it's almost like Simon and Garfunkel if they were like way more rock and roll and dance, you know what I mean? That's kind of the first album. The second album is way more like guitar, blues guitar, rock and roll, heavy metal stuff, like not heavy metal, rock and roll, like long guitar solos, stuff like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Mm-hmm.
that's the second album. And it's got a few songs on there that aren't great, to be honest. Anyway, but my perspective is like this album comes out. Well, it comes out in the UK, it just bombs. Like nobody likes it, everybody hates it. I'm friends with a lot of people in the UK, and they're like, a few of them will be like, "Oh, that album's kind of underrated," but everyone's like, "That album's garbage." They just, they kind of wanted to have like, the same album over again from before. Anyway, he goes a lot into the detail of why the album is so different, and what happens is they start touring with that second album, and this is the stuff about going back to the book and not just my perspective. They start touring with that album, but it turns out like John Squire had kind of the guitarist had kind of taken over the songwriting duties, and that's why it's a little bit more rock and roll. Um, and the author talks about how the songs aren't really written in the singer's key, like the proper key for him. They're a little bit different. So when they're touring, Ian just sounds horrible live, apparently. Like there's all
Oh,
these reports
okay.
of where the singer just sounds terrible. He's not a great singer, to be honest with you, especially live. He's just not. Um, but if he's singing the right key, it's obviously much better, right? And so they actually talk about like potentially replacing him as a singer. And there's all this infighting. So there's just got all these legal problems, and it's their own fault, right? Like they signed the dumb contract, they threw paint on this other guy. Look, it's just unbelievable. But then John Squire leaves the band, the main like writer and stuff. So the guitarist leaves the band, and they actually at this point they're trying to get a deal in the U.S. with Geffen Records. I don't know if you know David Geffen, but Geffen Records, and they Geffen is also the rights holder to. They signed Guns N' Roses, and this was at the same time that Guns N' Roses were having kind of their problems. And so they actually at one time, believe it or not, had talked about having Slash come play with the Stone Roses, which is so odd to me
Whoa, wow.
because Guns N' Roses are such a hair band, you know what I mean? Totally different, but obviously Slash is a great guitarist, and have him come replace John Squire. It's just crazy to think that could have in a different world that happened, right?
Right.
Anyway, so this is just kind of the stuff they get into. Ian ends up having Aziz Abram come and play some of the live shows. He's a different guitarist from the Manchester area. And then ultimately they just break up. They just like, you know what, this is over. The Stone Roses are over. And so it's kind of this weird tragedy story of like this unbelievable debut album. Like it's truly, depending on who you talk to, obviously their age group and stuff. This is one of the albums that people will say is the best album of all time, right? Like people will argue that, and I would maybe argue and definitely listen to it. The argument, does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
it's that good. Um, and then their second album, again, a lot of people don't like it. I think it's great. There's a few songs that aren't great, but there's some really really cool different. It's just different, right? It's a lot different. And then they just flamed out and disappeared, right? Not disappeared, but they just broke up. And since then, Ian Brown has gone on to do a bunch of solo stuff, and Aziz Abram has kind of helped him or worked with him on that. And so there's but he kind of got more into like more dance hip hop type stuff. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit different than the Stone Roses. Anyway, that's what the book is all about. And there's I think there's like 4 or 5 different like biographies of the Stone Roses that are worth reading. I saw something on Twitter a while ago that said like which book is the best, and I'm like, oh, I've only read this one. I didn't even know there were other ones.
Oh,
But
wow.
if you're interested in the story and don't really want to read the book, Blood on the Turntable, check that out on YouTube. It's a BBC documentary. There's also a cool film. Oh, sorry. Let me just say this because there's a film by Shane Meadows, kind of a documentary where the Stone Roses actually get back together. So this is my advice, having lived for a few years. If your favorite band breaks up, just wait till they run out of money, and they'll suddenly become friends again and do a reunion tour, because it's happened multiple times to me. So a few years ago, the Stone Roses got back together, right? And I have a really good friend from Leeds, and he worked in Manchester, and I said, Mark, like like the Stone Roses. There's rumors of them getting back together. He's like, mate, there's lemons all over there's a lemon on the cover of the album, famously. And he's like, mate, there's lemons all over Manchester. It's unbelievable. I can't believe like this is because people that were, 16, 17 at the time, they're now in their 40s. Suddenly their favorite band is playing, Etihad Stadium in Manchester. Anyway, they came over to New York and played Madison Square Garden. So my wife and I went to see them. And that was the only time I've ever seen the Stone Roses because I never really had the chance. And it was it was an amazing experience. There were some British guys in front of us that were just losing their minds, right? Seeing them in New York. And I obviously bought a shirt. And the next day I'm walking through Central Park and I've got this big lemon shirt on. And this guy literally runs over to me. He's like kind of far away. He runs over and he's like, "Oh man, I love your shirt. You were there last night. Us too. We came from Kansas because we came from Utah." And he's like, "We
Oh,
came from
wow.
Kansas. This is so awesome." He's like, "Wasn't that an amazing show?" So this is a band that truly like resonates with at least my age group that were into that kind of stuff. And they've got back together. And the reason I was telling you that partially is there's a Shane Meadows documentary that you can watch. It's like on like Freevee or some of those free movies with ads or whatever. That just kind of it actually documents them getting back together for this reunion tour. They actually released 2 new songs, and there was talk of them creating a new album, but they just ended up fighting and broke up again. So that's the story. That's why it's called War and Peace, right? Because it's like
Okay.
just such a crazy story of tumult. You know what I mean? Of them trying to write albums. They put out a brilliant album and then can't do anything for 5 years. Put out a second album that people didn't like generally, and then and then they got back together in the or the 2015 or so or whenever it was, and then broke up again. So
So
and
top hit in 1995 while you're listening to Stone Roses. What do you
yeah,
think it was?
oh man, something from like oh man, some like I'm trying to think of like a boy band, right?
No, no, not a boy
Is
band.
is it Madonna? Somebody like Madonna? Did she have some resurgence back then?
She was in the top 10.
Is it Cher? I don't know.
It's Gangsta's Paradise with
Oh, okay.
Coolio.
Nice. Nice. Nice.
So one of the things that I'm really envious about you is you have found your music genre.
For
Like
sure.
you
Yep.
know exactly what you like. It tends
Yep.
to be UK bands
Yeah, sure.
mostly.
British rock. Yep, for
I
sure.
mean, you fly to England, I don't know, once or twice a year to just
Yep.
just to see these bands, and then you'll go to every show while you're there,
Yep.
which which is really cool to be that passionate about like the music genre. I grew up listening to country and then got into like alternative.
Yep.
And I feel like for me, I'll get annoyed. I'll start listening to 90s country, and then after a while, I'm done. I'm sick of that. And then I go to
Yeah.
alternative. I'm like, I'm sick of that. I don't think I've found my genre yet.
Well, and there's a lot of people that are a lot more eclectic than me. I pretty much, it's funny because somebody else mentioned something like that, like, Matt, you know exactly what you like, and you just don't care if people think that, like
Oh
whatever. And
yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I like what I like. But I'll to be honest with you, so just really quick, we went to see the Charlatans again. They're my favorite band. That's a different story, and we can talk about them later. But that was about this exactly the same time, but they're a band that stayed together and have put out like 13 albums, and pretty much every album is great, and they're my favorite band for sure. They were putting on 4 shows in 4 days in their hometown near Manchester, and we decided to go over there. And this is kind of how I got. I actually was. It's funny that you say I had my my genre, because I kind of like got stuck in the 90s British rock stuff, and then I'm like, there's nothing else that's good. And you can argue this with me, but I don't think there's much good that came out in like from the year 2000 to 2010, right? But there was not a lot of good stuff happening music wise. There are a lot of changes in the music industry as well. But anyway,
Yeah.
when we went to go see the Charlatans, they made it a big deal because we were coming from Utah, right? They found out on Twitter we were going to there, and they had a bunch of opening bands, and the band Deja Vega, who we're thankful that they let us use their music on the podcast. They were one of the opening bands for the Charlatans, and I got to meet them, and they're just a small band that should be absolutely huge because they're unbelievable. But anyway, I got to meet them, and I'm like, they kind of reinvigorated my interest in, or my faith in music, because I'm like, holy cow, a band that's like kind of this young is putting out some unbelievable stuff. And I thought that was kind of over. I thought we were just like, it's all pop, like
Mm-hmm.
nonsense, manufactured stuff. And I was like, oh, there's this whole basically the heart of the Manchester music lives on, and there's just some great bands that are coming out that you know you don't know about. So they actually got me back interested into like even just trying to listen to new music, and finding from friends on Twitter, especially from that area that are really into the music scene. They'll introduce bands to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are unbelievable. How does everyone not know about this band? Like Moonlight Parade or Victories at Sea. There's just so many awesome little bands that should be big that not a lot of people know about. But if you follow the right people, I guess let's look at it this way: Twitter is, or X or whatever you want to call it, is kind of a rough place. But if you find the right people to follow and stay out of the negativity, there's some really
It's
cool,
awesome.
cool
Yeah.
things you can happen. There's so many cool bands that I've gotten to know, from Twitter and kind of those friends over there. So anyway, enough of that. Anything else we should talk about? Game summary? Should we do a game summary? Don't get into debt and be passionate about whatever it is, if it's music or whatever, and enjoy it. I don't know.
Be an unafraid lover of your music genre. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What would you rate the
Oh, we've
biography?
we didn't get your rating either.
I would say a triple for Debt. I mean, it was
Okay.
really good, really entertaining. I get a little bit frustrated when you start to get political agendas weaved into the story.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
rather just like stick to the facts. So there's a
Right.
little bit of that, but I just kind of ignore it and keep pushing on. So I'd say it was a triple for me.
And then what are you applying to your life here?
I think just being open minded towards money, how the genesis of money,
Hmm.
staying out of debt, being
Yeah.
a wise steward over your funds,
Yeah.
and be as independent as you can financially as soon as you can.
Right.
And
You
that's
want
probably
be
what I pull. You don't want to owe people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
You might
It's
get
rough.
sold to somebody else's tribe, and I don't want that. I want to stay in my
I don't
tribe.
want to be in the Citibank tribe or Chase Bank tribe.
No,
I
no,
want to be
yeah, pay off your land as soon as you can.
there you go. All right. So I would probably rate it, to me it's basically a triple, I would say, but this is definitely one of those things where you have to be interested in the genre or to some degree. It's an interesting story, but honestly, you could just go watch that Blood on the Turntable documentary and get what you know what I mean? It's obviously a lot more detail. They get into like, when John and Ian grew up together and were kind of friends playing on the playground and stuff. But like it's not, none of that's totally necessary for kind of the craziness that you can catch the highlights and be fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you have to be pretty into it to want to really read this particular book, and or read other ones, right? Like they talk on that Twitter feed that I was telling you about, where people said which book is better. Some people are like, "Oh, the one by John Robb is better because it focuses on the early stuff. This one's better because it focuses on the late stuff and the breakup and whatever." So it kind of depends on what you want, but you can get the highlights from a documentary. The thing that's cool also about documentary of that is you can at least hear they'll be playing music the whole time in the background, so you can get a sense of
Hmm.
what they're like without like I said back in the Led Zeppelin book, where I'd be reading and I'm like, I don't know this song, I got to go listen to it. There's a song that influenced them. I got to go find it, and it would just take me forever to get through the book because I didn't know all those random songs. And anyway, so I would give it maybe a triple for me personally, but just go watch the documentary if you want to spend an hour learning about what I just talked about. So
Blood on the Turntable,
Blood
and
on the
check out
Turntable.
check out Fool's Gold. I love 10-minute songs.
How crazy was that? Because it just he stopped singing, and then there's like 7 minutes of just funky
Yeah.
music. Yeah,
Well, I play a little guitar, so when I
yeah,
hear you can definitely tell it's like from the 70s, the wah guitar, like the
yeah,
wow
yeah,
wow, the funky
yeah.
sound. They
Yep.
kind of pull that in, but I think it was done well. I like the bass line and drums, and
Yeah,
it was fine. Like to listen to it for 10 minutes, it wasn't annoying at all. And then he like
yeah,
comes in and sings for a little bit and then goes back
yeah,
out. So it
yeah,
was good.
yeah. So check out the album. If nothing else, you can at least check out some Stone Roses songs and people that are listening, and see what you think. So, all right, that is it. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it. We will see you next time on the Pitch Book Podcast. See ya. Oh, gotta get the right mouse here. Hang on a second.